1, 2, 3.
Welcome to Scéalta. My name is Joe Austin. If you've just joined us, can I remind you that Scéalta is broadcast from the James Connolly Centre. It's a joint production of Féile Fiesta here in Féile and Phobail. And over the 2 years that Scéalta has been in existence, for better or for worse, we've had authors who wanted to be politicians, we've had politicians that wanted to be lecturers, we've had lecturers that wanted to be world changers, and we've had columnists who wanted to change the world. We have never had all of the above encapsulated in one person. The Marquis Who's Who describes my guest as an educationalist, an historian, a former politician, columnist, broadcaster, podcaster, peace advisor to more countries than I can remember, and it is Dr. Brian Feeney. So I don't know whether you want to keep the doctor or we'll leave the doctor just to say for a moment.
We leave that bit off, yeah.
But you are all of those things. You encapsulate them all.
Well, some of them more than others, let's put it that way, and some of them are in the past. It's not all at the same time.
It's been some journey, Brian. You know, I had the privilege of serving with you for a while in Belfast City Council. I think you were there for 13 years.
Yep.
Longer than me, I had.
It certainly felt longer.
Oh, it probably did. And you decided that, you know, enough's enough. We were both serving the communities of North Belfast, and it was hectic and a bad time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you'd be forgiven for believing that when you had finished that sentence that you could kind of put your feet up, but you didn't. You travelled the world.
Well, during all that time, I had a full-time job as a lecturer in St Mary's University College. I was head of history there, so I was giving lectures and classes and all the rest of it. And then in holiday time, I would do political work all through the 90s. I was able to do that because of an American organisation which is called the National Democratic Institute, who sent me to mostly conflict zones or zones which had come out of conflict after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of communism in the 90s. So that's why I was there, and you know, went to places like Romania, Bosnia, Croatia,
Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Palestine, and that's to name a few.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, some of them were absolutely fascinating. One of the things you learned going to those places was that, I mean, the point of being there was to try to develop political ideas and political parties and explain how you produce policies and work in a democratic system. And the interesting thing was, pretty well wherever you went, people were the same. I mean, I was in Angola, and we brought together the various fighting factions there who'd been fighting for years and years, and the focus groups. And the women in Angola wanted exactly the same thing as the women in the Czech Republic. They wanted healthcare, they wanted education for their kids. And when you asked them what was their priority and so on, it would almost be exactly the same. I mean, there were local things too. And, you know, I made mistakes. I remember in Ethiopia, I was plunked out with a group of about 60 or 70 people who'd been flown in from different parts. I had no idea the size of Ethiopia or the fact that there were about 75 million people living there, all speaking different languages. Anyway, I was explaining to them how to develop political policies and manifestos and what you do, and one of them being, say, asking for a health centre, developing health centres and all the rest of it. So this guy said, excuse me, do you realise that for most of us, it's 3 days walk to the nearest road?
Amazing.
I said, okay, we'll take 10 and I'll come back.
3 days walk. I mentioned all your kind of academic credentials, and they are impressive and they are considerable. I think 20 years in St Mary's College.
40 years.
40 years. The head of history.
Mm-hmm.
you'd be kind of way forgiven for thinking if with all of that historical background and knowledge and experience, and why did you put yourself through Belfast City Council? Did you not run the other direction?
Well, I'd always been interested in politics, and I did my PhD in England. And when I was in England, I was in the Labour Party in England, and when I came back here, I joined the SDLP and got involved in politics, and then was persuaded to stand for Belfast City Council, because it's the only way to change society. It's the only way to change people. I mean, you can join something like the St Vincent de Paul or some charitable
commendable as they all may be,
but you cannot change society. You can do things for people, deliver food, deliver clothes, or whatever. But when it comes to allocating houses, allocating resources, politics is the only way to do that. And so that was for me the important thing. I mean, I can remember, at one stage I was chairman of leisure services in Belfast, and the first thing I asked the director of leisure services when I became chairman was, how much money can I spend without putting it out to tender? Because you can allocate resources.
But
I mean, that's at a very low level. But that's
could make a difference.
You can.
Was Belfast? I have to say, by the time I reached Belfast City Council, it already was a verbatim. It already was that, as Martin O'Miller said, that dome of delight. But was it a shock for you? Did you get what you expected? Was it something that you were prepared for?
No, you couldn't be prepared for the hatred. The hatred that unionist councillors felt for anybody from the nationalist side. There's absolutely, it was palpable, the distrust and the hatred and refusal to accept anything or do anything. And whatever, any proposal that was the nationalist side made was automatically turned down. It wasn't a matter if it was meritorious or if it was going to help everybody. No. I can remember it being summed up by George Seawright, who was an appalling figure, member of the UVF, but despite the fact the RUC Special Branch knew that he had a legally held weapon until he jumped on the car of Tom King in 1986. Right, yes. His weapon was removed from him. But I was pushing for a leisure centre, a play park at the Bone Heights, as they call
the old park area
near Ardoyne and the Bone, and failing to get that, then just a park on the Cave Hill Road. Anyway, the location doesn't matter, but there's a whole lot of toing and froing, and because it was a good proposal and it was sensible and all the rest of it, they had to find a way to refuse it, which they did. But George Seawright stood up and said, look, you see all this stuff, these people, they're all hypocrites. These ones thinking of reasons why it's not going to be built there. He said, the reason you're not getting it is because you're Fenians and Republicans.
And that's the end.
And that was the truth. That was the truth.
You always have had a reputation, I have to say, whether as a commentator, and I want to speak about your writing in a moment. Commentator or writer, I've never had the privilege of listening to one of your lectures when you were in St Mary's. You didn't really endear yourself to unionists in the city council. In fact, you tried to take your life, the life of your family as well. The house was bombed.
I was bombed twice. Yeah.
Did it ever have the effect of going, no, I've had enough of this, or was it just what you done?
It's what I expected, and the situation in the city council in the 1980s was really seriously bad. An awful lot of councillors carried personal weapons. 1981, the year of the hunger strike, was particularly bad, and it was made worse by the killing of Roy Bradford, South Belfast unionist MP. And the police had advised people there was likely to be retaliation against other political figures, and so people were concerned about going into the council, because when you go in, you have to come back out again.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Somebody could be waiting for you. But there was never any case of saying, right, okay, that's it, or walking away, because you're going to leave it to the unionists then. If there's nobody there who's prepared to come down and take them on and expose what they're doing, then they get a penalty kick.
It's very much, it's very much that when you take on, when you and I and people who are in public life or were in public life, when you take on that role, and you told me a story off camera about being mistaken in the supermarket for Alex Kane, which is quite funny. But we for better or for worse, and I think for worse most occasions, we also bring our families along with us. And Patricia, your wife, I said about the bomb at the house, lived with a constant fear of you getting to the City Hall, getting back from the City Hall, speaking at events, appearing on television and all of that. Where is she from? Is she a Belfast woman? Or?
No, she's from Coal Island, in Tyrone.
Oh, very good. Well, good stock in Tyrone.
Yeah.
And what part of Belfast do you? I take it is Belfast. That
it is. Yes. I'm from Clonard.
Are you?
Yes.
You're a Falls Road man.
Well, I was born in Springfield Road.
Well, you're just off the Falls Road.
Near the corner of Cooper Street. In the early part of the last century.
I always assumed you were a North Belfast person.
No,
like me.
No. I went to England, and I came back from England, moved to North Belfast. But I grew up in Clonard. I went to school beside Clonard in St Gall's there.
Yeah.
And then moved to Andersonstown. I played water polo for Clonard. I was the goalie. We won the Irish Cup. Beat North Dublin, terrible, dirty team.
I should have given you that accreditation to begin with, because that's probably more impressive. You're the only polo player I've ever met, so there you go. England, for a young lad going to England to study, you mentioned early on, a paddy abroad, was it difficult at that period?
It was. It was. This was in the 70s, and it was. I can remember. I used to, you go to the same shop every Sunday, buy the newspapers.
Yeah.
And I've been doing this for a few months, and when I went into the shop on this occasion, I can't remember what incident there had been in England.
Yeah.
But I went into the shop and there were 2 or 3 other people there, and the guy behind the counter. When he saw me coming in, he started, see these guys, these guys in Belfast sort of carry on. You know what I do? They're in internment camp. I would take one of them out every day and shoot them until they stop this nonsense.
And you only in for a pint of milk?
Yeah. So, that was the last time I was in the shop, but that sort of stuff.
I mentioned that you're occasionally described as an educationalist as well as a columnist. I want to speak about being an author and your writing and so on. Were you always destined to be a teacher, a lecturer, a professor? Yes. Was that where you were heading?
Yes, that's what I wanted to do.
Can I ask you, was that through choice? Was it something that did you see as a young man that teaching
that's what I wanted to do. When I went to Queen's, it was with a view to, I didn't apply for any other kind of job except teaching. I taught in St Malachy's College.
And how did you find student life? Were you a good student or a rebellious student?
No, I was a good student. I love books, academic stuff. I spent years and years doing research in the Public Record Office in England, in Oxford, in the Bodleian Library. I'm a life member of the Bodleian. No, I just liked academic stuff. Both my higher degree, the master's degree and PhD, are both in Middle Ages, medieval Latin. I can read medieval Latin shorthand.
Very good.
There's
very few people I would imagine can say that.
Yeah, I was probably born the wrong century.
Well, I don't know about that. I read when we were doing some of the research, and I was looking at some of the books that you produced a whole volume of books, and I can't go through them all, it just isn't, but I want to speak about some of them. 16 years researching, 15 years researching, that seems like a lifetime.
Yeah, but I mean, I've just finished a new book, and that took a number of years.
Keep a new book for a moment.
That took a number of years researching. You know, it's that's what I like doing.
You're the co-author of Lost Lives.
Yeah.
And I haven't read it recently, to be quite honest, although I do have a copy of it, and periodically I flick, and a memory jumps out, or a death that jumps out. It must have been a very difficult book to put together, especially from North Belfast.
Well, the group of us came together about 1992, when we knew the whole thing was coming to an end. There was going to be a ceasefire. Didn't know it was going to be 92, 93, but it was. That
was the drift of politics, yeah.
And I had a database of the deaths in North Belfast in my area. And I've been keeping that for years and years. So that was a starting point. And then David McKittrick and the late Seamus Kelters
of the Irish News.
He was working in the Irish News at the time, and they had also got stuff. So we just gravitated together. So we kind of divided up the work. And Chris Thornton, who works in the BBC, who was also in the Irish News at the time, and we started very primitive early days before the internet really got going, and we used to have floppy disks. And by 1993 or 4, we had what we thought was the whole thing on 11 floppy disks, and we used to send them to each other by taxi. And then we got modems for emails. And the modem, the first one we got, cost £150 each. We had a bit of a grant from the Roundtree Trust. Anyway, it was 14.4 kilobytes per second. And you just couldn't wait all night, so we didn't send the stuff by taxi. But it took us really all those years together. We got it out in 1999 eventually.
Was it difficult to collate?
It's
I mean, emotionally difficult. I don't even mean
well, you had you proofreading it. You know, we had to divide that up, and after, you know, you'd do so many and then just put it down and walk away, because some of the stuff
it's horrendous.
Is absolutely dreadful. You know, heartbreaking, and you know, the guys running into, you know, the one guy, one comes to mind about a guy going in to shoot somebody. It was in Forfar Street, which may not mean a lot to people outside Belfast, but it's off the Springfield Road. This guy ran into the house and shot this guy, looked all around him and said, "Christ, I'm in the wrong house."
Terrible.
And that was it. And no one ever knew who he was never caught, and off he went. But that was a really difficult set of things to go through. So we divided it up. And different groups of us, different individuals did different parts of the north or Belfast or whatever.
I remember Jim Gibney, who's a friend of yours and a former columnist in the Irish News, been invited to North Belfast to Ardoyne to speak at an event. And immediately before the event, there was a reading of those from the area who had been assassinated. And the young lad read them. His father had been assassinated. And when this list was completed, Jim Gibney was in pieces. How do you speak after that? And that's only a relatively small part of it. And I often wonder, especially for writers, and especially for good writers, which you are, of course, that research, that revisiting of all those horrendous situations and scenes and all of that is bad enough. To be a councillor, to go to families as well as to try and put it together, I think it's just one of those terrible times, and let's hope they're all behind us anyway. Can I go take you back to St Mary's just slightly, and your love of history and your love of all of that? Was it shared by your pupils?
Not always. Not always.
Was it frustrating?
Yeah, it is frustrating. Not everybody comes to education to become an educationalist or to immerse themselves in a particular subject. I mean, any student's going to be doing several subjects and then maybe finally sort of focus on one particular thing. But that isn't going to be their whole life.
Yeah.
And for years and years it was mine. And so I would be reading books and reading reviews of books and think that this would be useful to students. And they come out after an exam and throw all the stuff behind them. And I'll never look at another history book in my life.
That for me, that would be soul destroying for me, because I would expect them and want them to have as much passion for the subject as I would have.
Yeah, but they don't. Some did. Some did. Of course they did. Went on, did higher degrees, or became, history teachers in a school they went to teach in. But a whole lot of them, just as I say, they walk out, throw the book. You could see this outside exam halls.
Oh, you mean literally throw the book?
Literally, the book's lying on the floor. I'll never look at that again in my life.
Little did they know.
Yeah.
You have left, or you've been reprieved, or you've escaped from Belfast City Hall.
Yes.
You're still in St Mary's College. When did you begin the column in the Irish News? 20 years?
No,
longer,
1993.
93.
Yeah.
Okay. And was that difficult? I mean, was that just a natural extension of your interest in politics, your love of history, and your requirement to change?
Yeah, it was. Because, by 1993 I was already writing stuff for the Lost Lives book.
Yeah.
So you're doing these little memos, we called them, for each individual, and you had so I was writing anyway, but I was also writing statements for political stuff. So it just slotted in.
Do you remember your first piece that appeared in the Irish News?
I think I do. It was attacking a guy who had been appointed to the an Irish language body, and he had no interest whatsoever in Irish language, and in fact he had no interest in Irish culture, but he was appointed to this with the acquiescence of the Irish government, and so there he was. So I had a go at this guy. I think I can remember pointing out that he was to the Irish language what the Sudan is to cross-country skiing.
Very, very, very apt. You have a reputation, and I don't know whether you'll agree with me or not. I've been very frank in both your opinions and in your writings, and I'm thinking now, for instance, of your regular appearance on television, talk back on the radio, and all of that. You don't seem to suffer fools lately, and I remember you in the council, and you didn't suffer fools lately. Is that an indication of your personality, or is it a need to put things clinically right or be accurate, or where does that come from?
No, it is the way I see things, and I hate hypocrisy, and beating around the bush, and I don't suffer fools at all. And if somebody's said something that's stupid or wrong or hypocritical, I'll tell them that it is. And it's important that you do that instead of letting them get away with it. And in this particular year about the protocol and so on, the sort of hypocrisy and double speak that's coming out is just impossible to bear without having a crack at it, and the people who are uttering the nonsense.
I think sometimes you're more angry with the journalists than you are with the commentary, with those who are making comments on it. Of the books that you have written, I've read them all. Do you have a favourite?
Yeah, it's Insider. It's the life of Gerry Bradley,
who I knew well. Yeah.
Who was an IRA activist for most of his life, really, from the time of
Whitey Bradley. Yeah.
Whitey Bradley, that's right.
Yeah.
From he was about 15 or 16, and was active he didn't actually, he wasn't convicted until about 1994. So he'd been active from like 1971, 72. And so we sat down and we did interviews about once a fortnight for over a year. So I got to know him very well over that time, and got to understand them. And so, as I say, it's the one that I like the best, because it was him speaking.
The book that you wrote, I have to say that in terms of your column, that you have, that I can see now, and I'm sure there's others would disagree, but that I can see that there isn't anybody that's given a freebie in your column, that you're quite at home, or you see the need, or you're quite comfortable criticising, pointing out, making comment from every political persuasion. Your book on Sinn Féin was, I think, particularly incisive. It was very forthright. It was a compilation of 100 years of the progression of the party. Did you find it difficult? I mean, you have your own political views, or you had your own political views.
Yeah.
Was it hard to write a book like that and remain objective, or were you just in the middle of it? And
it comes from the training you get as a historian, and especially if you're doing a PhD, where you have to step back and be detached from the evidence and examine the evidence. And so that's it was a history book about Sinn Féin and the pros and cons, and the successes and the failures, and so there's no difficulty stepping back and examining Sinn Féin as a phenomenon over a century.
And it is a phenomenon in every sense, sometimes good, sometimes not so good.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I was asking you off camera just about engagement, and we get, at least I get taken for you, and you don't have that problem of getting taken for me. But do people feel like, you're a public figure, let's go and criticise what you've written or what you... And I'm thinking, for instance, there was a period where you were criticising the politics of the SDLP, not the individuals, not even the party, but the politics of it. Was there any kickback around it? Did people think, for instance, that you shouldn't be saying these things?
Yeah, of course. People in the SDLP obviously took exception to being criticised, but the fact of the matter is, people in the SDLP take exception to being criticised by anybody, not just me. Because there's almost this holier than thou attitude that grew up in the SDLP, and by the 1980s, for some of them it was the only reason for existence was, we're not Sinn Féin, so you can't criticise us.
But I mean, it wasn't harsh criticism. It was productive criticism, constructive.
Yeah,
I thought.
But you're not to take exception to it, and that's just the way it is.
I want to talk about the Antrim, the Irish Revolution book that you've just completed, which I have to say, I would commend it to anyone. I know it took many years to put together.
Yeah.
Two things immediately struck me about the book. The first thing is how easy it is to read. And for me, that's always a good thing.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that.
That's always a good thing.
Well, let me tell you, I've fought long battles with the series editors, who were, very, very uptight academics, and we'd actually fight about words, and and you can't say something like that. I said, listen, you can't. I want somebody to read the book. Yes, I don't want it to be sitting on a shelf, and academic, and forget it.
I thought that was one. The detail of it was amazing. I mean, you at one stage expose an IRA cadre, an IRA group that was based in Rosemary Street and McDavid's tailor's shop, and all of that, and how they'd access the shop from North Street and Lower North Street and all that. Or how do you set about? Where do you find the research there? How do you find it?
Well, I like doing research. As I've said before, I have no problem sitting for hours and hours going through this. The great thing about it was the work that the Bureau of Military History has done, and they have digitised a huge number of records. So, for example, the witness statements, which came out really from the late 40s, mid to late 40s, where anyone who was active from like 1913, 14, right the way through, was invited to give a witness statement to the Irish military.
Yeah, yeah.
And there are 1,773 of them. And they're all searchable.
Amazing.
And it can be a bit of a nuisance. I remember when I was writing the book on Seán Mac Diarmada.
Yes,
so you type in Seán Mac Diarmada. But that's only one. Then there's Seán McDermott, John McDermott, McDermott with 2 T's, McDermott with 1 T. There are 1,100 references to Seán McDermott in the witness statements, and most of them amount to, I saw Seán McDermott walking down such and such a street, and that's it.
Yeah.
But if you don't look at it, somebody else is going to, you're going to lose them. Anyway, so that's one thing you look at. But the big thing this time was they had, and that saves going to Dublin all the time and reading through this. The big thing this time was that I was able to access the military service pensions collection, which have just been made public about 3 years ago.
Right.
And that means, and anybody can do this, and people should. Anyone who was active during the War of Independence or before, they could get a pension. When Fianna Fáil came in after 1932, there's a pension made available. But in order to get the pension, you had to say what you did. So you have to say, I did this and I did this. And I'm telling you, some of the stuff is pretty serious, me and such and such guy, we're walking down High Street and there were 2 auxiliaries, and this is actually fact. There were 2 auxiliaries walking along with 2 girls. So we just came up beside them and shot them both. One of the girls got shot too, but she was only wounded, so it was all right.
It doesn't really count.
So actually, the whole series of things that they explain who did it and why they did it, and now, so that's the detail that you can go into. That's how I found out about the active service unit that was based in Taylor's, and I was come the man woman that ran it.
That's right.
Not the active service unit. She kept the arms.
She was a facilitator.
Well, she ran, took all the messages, connected with brigade headquarters. The whole thing.
One of the things again, first of all, I would commend the book. People who have even a casual interest in history or the history of this city should get the book or buy it for someone as a Christmas present. Now, it's me saying that, not you. Mm-hmm. So I don't make any apologies for that.
Well, thank you very much. Yep.
So how do they get it? It's on sale at all the best bookshops? It's on sale.
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
And you can also get a copy from Four Courts Press, but it's in bookshops like Waterstones or whatever.
Well, people should get it. It's commendable. The other thing about it, and I said there were 2 things that struck me reading the book, was that how small Belfast is, how small even the county of Antrim is. Mm-hmm. And lots of the things that happened around that period reoccurred. Mm-hmm. You find that stuff that had been going on in Belfast later on in our lifetime happened exactly the same areas that it had happened in.
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you to comment on this, because you probably couldn't as you're the author, but I think if you took some of the names out of the organisations, some of the authorities, the RUC, the RIC, be special duty, you can interchange them and it would make sense. It would be, but the read is an excellent read. Can I take you back and then bring you forward again? And I said, your column in the Irish News is widely read. You mentioned the protocol. We both mentioned Belfast of our day, Belfast City Hall of our day, and all that. Are things getting better, Brian, or are they remaining, or even going backwards?
Things aren't getting better. There's complete stalemate in Stormont, and the DUP in particular blocks everything. There is no reciprocation. Anything that Sinn Féin proposes or offers or suggests is blocked, and there's no reciprocation at all from the DUP. We're talking about any kind of social progress. It doesn't matter. They oppose same-sex marriage, abortion. They're currently making abortion facilities available. They oppose the Irish language. As a party, they're completely locked, and there's no leadership at all. 10 years ago, like 2011, Peter Robinson was telling the DUP, look, the support we have is composed of largely Protestants. The demography is changing. We have got to reach out and get the support of people who want to support the union who aren't Protestants.
Yeah.
He was immediately put down by the hardliners in his party, and he gave up. This was at the time when Martin McGuinness decided, okay, if you're going to refuse the development at Long Kesh, well, that's that. And so things have not improved at all in the last 10 years. The DUP hasn't changed, and in many respects they got worse. And the interesting thing was this year, the first election of the leader they had, it was Edwin Poots.
Yeah.
And
the famous purge.
And electing Edwin Poots, a guy who is a real flat earther, who thinks that the universe is only slightly older than Ian Paisley Sr. And what does that say about the elected representatives? They elect a guy like this who is therefore anti-science, who doesn't accept science, who doesn't, even at the moment, and last year, refused to allow the lockdown to be brought in again in November last year. And then, of course, it had to be. Christmas was abolished. So that says a lot about the DUP, and it's so frustrating for any political party to try to make progress against them. Now, the one good thing is that now in the Assembly, Sinn Féin, SDLP, the Greens, People for Profit, all that, and Alliance outnumber the Unionists. Now that's good, but when you get to the executive, the DUP exercises a veto.
Yeah.
So you're stuck. And what they're doing at the moment, what the main Unionist party is doing at the moment, is proving what Republicans have always said, which is that this place doesn't work, because they're refusing to make it work unless they own it.
It's almost near Christmas, and with the season of goodwill and all of that. And apart from me recommending the book, would you look forward to Christmas with goodwill? Would you look forward with optimism? Do you think that, despite, and I agree with your assessment of politics, but would you agree that, or do you feel, rather not would you agree, do you feel that there's any merit and any kind of hope that things will change?
I don't. I don't. I
was waiting for you to say yes.
No, I don't. And all the evidence is that it won't change. And the most recent poll shows that 49% of Unionists, that's across the board, are unwilling to accept a Sinn Féin First Minister. Absurd though that is, because the two First and Deputy First Minister, they can't do anything.
Oh, they're trying to
You can't order tea without having it countersigned. So, it's just the symbolism of having someone who isn't a unionist running something, even though it isn't the case, it's just the symbolism. So, that isn't just the DUP, that's half the unionists who
on that very sombre note, I thought you were actually going to pull something out of the hat and say there's change around the corner.
Let me tell you, one night Alex Kane and I were both coming out of UTV after doing an interview with something, and these guys were walking up the Armour Road, rather unsteadily, you know. But one of them shouted, "Hey, there's two old guys, those two old guys, they put out the light at the end of the tunnel."
On those words, Brian Feeney, you've been a great guest. Thank you.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.